You might not think it when you look at me these days, but as a teenager, I loved parkour. I used to hang around with a group of friends and would be outside for hours finding the best places to climb, run, and jump around. I'd watch District 13 on repeat in awe of how David Bell, the founder of the method, could move. I was never the best at it, but it was a great time, and what I miss most about those days is the sense of freedom to go wherever I wanted, or at least dared to, unbound by the unspoken social contract to stick to the pavement. As I've gotten older, I still search for that sense of freedom in video games. I've been playing Assassin's Creed since the very first game launched in 2007, when I was just 14 years old. And that game partially set in motion my obsession with parkour in real life at the time, and later my obsession with great traversal systems in video games. I have the collector's edition for every mainline entry in the series, so to say I'm a fan of Assassin's Creed might be underselling it. I've always loved history, swords, stealth and mystery, but the movement drew me to Assassin's Creed more than anything else. Very few games offered verticality in the way that AC1 did back in the day. Prince of Persia allowed you to perform spectacular wall runs and acrobatics, but it was still a structured platformer with a specific path and rigid level design. Altair was not bound by the restrictions that the Prince was, even if he couldn't turn back time. Now, before we dig into the topic of this video, I just want to say thank you for stopping by. Don't forget to like the video if you enjoy it, and subscribe if you're new here. It does really help me out a lot. So let's get into it. I could spend an hour talking about the good and bad things that Ubisoft has done with Assassin's Creed's parkour over the years, but I don't have to, because White Light has already made one of, if not the best retrospective on YouTube. I've shouted out his content before, and I do recommend checking out his video on this subject as well, looking back through the franchise. It was hugely helpful in allowing me to structure my thoughts for this video, in which we'll be looking at what Ubisoft should be doing going forward with parkour, even if we know they probably won't. So the link for White Light's video is in the description, but I'm going to assume that if you're watching this, you've played at least a few Assassin's Creed games. You're probably aware of how great the parkour can be when it's at its best, and how flawed it is at its worst. And you're likely aware of how what started as a key pillar and selling point to the franchise has become nothing more than a gimmick or a box to tick, rather than a hook, a whole reason in and of itself to play the games. So let's touch on traversal in video games in general, especially open world games. As I've mentioned in previous videos about Spider-Man, very often in these games traversal is what you're doing for a large majority of the time. You're moving from objective to objective, location to location. The thing that you're spending the most time doing has to tick a few important boxes. It has to be visually appealing in some way, and different games will have various ways of accomplishing this. With Spider-Man, it's the sheer visceral quality of swinging and how impressive the animations are. With The Witcher 3, it's how stunning the vistas and environments are as you travel across a vast area on horseback. Two very different examples of how a game can keep the player engaged, and that's the second box that you have to tick. In Just Cause, you're engaged because it takes skill to maneuver and balance three different types of movement: your parachute, grapple hook, and wingsuit. In Zelda, you have to manage your stamina when climbing so that you don't fall to your death, choosing routes carefully. Red Dead Redemption and Ghost Recon have realistic and reactive environments, so you can fall and stumble or slip on snow and mud. But one way or another, all these games I've mentioned are keeping the player engaged through their visuals or the actual mechanics involved in traversal itself. Now, if we look at parkour in real life, it's truly spectacular. The best practitioners in the world are a sight to behold, pulling off stunts that look almost superhuman to the average person in the street. So a character such as an assassin that employs these same skills, you'd expect to be an absolute joy to play as, chaining together various moves effortlessly, with a system that gives the player complete freedom and control and keeps you engaged with various mechanics. Right? Well, not quite, unfortunately, or at least not always. The parkour system in AC1 back in 2007 was groundbreaking. Simple on the surface, but with layers to master. But Ubisoft has never managed to capitalize on and develop that system to perfection. With every subsequent release, it has been a case of one step forward and one step back, one step forward and two steps back, and so on. They change things that don't need to be changed, remove the good things that they add, and implement new features that take away that all-important engagement. It seems like it's been a constant up and down battle of sporadic trial and error rather than progression and refinement. Even worse, in the latest three games, It feels like they've stopped trying to iterate on parkour altogether, and have almost completely dumbed it down. With most franchises, you can see a logical and clear linear path of improvement. Just Cause 1 had a basic grapple hook that could be used on cars. Just Cause 2 upgraded it to be used on anything. Just Cause 3 added a wingsuit, which could be used in tandem with your grapple hook. Arkham Asylum had a grapple gun and glide. Arkham City had a grapple boost and dive bomb. Arkham Knight increased the boost and launch, added a ledge dive, wall rebounds, use of gadgets while gliding, air takedowns, and you get the idea. The point is, none of these games took anything away. They only added to and refined their systems. Assassin's Creed has always had issues with the character jumping to the wrong ledge or ejecting from a wall in the wrong direction. But the core system was great across the early games, and it's fair to say that there was some refinement. For example, Assassin's Creed 3 added realistic rock and tree climbing animations, but the problem is they took those new animations away in later games for no apparent reason. And this process of adding something new and interesting and then taking it away is a noticeable pattern. Ubisoft was always either not changing enough or changing too much. For each thing they added or fixed, they broke or removed something else. Assassin's Creed Unity seemed like it was going to be a complete game changer, finally moving everything in the right direction. A game that looked next-gen on the surface and visually still holds up today. You had more control over ascending and descending than ever before, and the animations would make even Insomniac blush. But it wasn't without its issues. Many issues. Unity had so many problems that due to its backlash, Ubisoft seemed terrified to ever be so ambitious with the franchise again. But they completely misread the response. They didn't realise how close they were to perfection, only to have missed the mark by an ant's walking stick.
We were on the verge of greatness. We were this close.
Rather than refining and iterating on what they got right with Unity, improving the control and terrible snap targeting, they simply abandoned all that progress completely. And with each subsequent release after that, parkour became more and more bare bones, until it's hardly worth being called parkour at all. In Valhalla, you can still climb pretty much anything. You can vault, you can slide, but it's just not the same as it once was. Not even close. That's largely due to the level design, abandoning the opportunity for parkour. You can have all the mechanics in the world, but without a playground to use them, they're pointless. Ubisoft has always had an issue with tutorialization as well. There are probably mechanics in the older games that you don't even know about, which means not only was the parkour not reaching its potential, but many players weren't reaching the potential of what was actually on offer as well, because the games never showed you how to do a lot of it. So gone are the complex rooftops of Paris. Now we just have a flat countryside and the occasional town or small city, which don't offer anywhere near the intricacies of previous games. The landscapes might look great, but the worlds just don't feel alive in the way that The Witcher 3 or Red Dead Redemption does. So they can't rely on that to keep the player engaged either. When it comes to Traversal, Assassin's Creed, the franchise that once set the standard, has lost its way. Mirage, at the time of this video, is just over a month away. The developers promise a return to franchise roots, but based on the footage that we've seen so far, I'm not feeling overly confident. Basim only seems slightly less sluggish than Eivor, and though parkour wasn't necessarily fast as such in AC1, it did have more mechanical depth than meets the eye, such as back and side ejects, which according to the developers aren't returning from Mirage. So how exactly is this a return to roots? It looks like more of the same, barring some new welcome additions like the pole vault. If it's not a return to the unassuming depth of AC1, and it's not a return to the stunning animations and fluid movement of Unity, what is it? Well, my main fear is that it's nothing more than marketing talk. The only way that I can see this being a return to roots is level design, and to be fair, that is the one thing that looks promising. Although Basim apparently can't move like Altair or Arno, he will at least have plenty of options for where he can move. Unless there are some pleasant surprises by October 5th, I'm not holding out hope that Mirage will be the traversal revolution that this franchise needs. So let's look beyond it. The whole design philosophy of parkour in Assassin's Creed needs to change. The old system is a little clunky and outdated, and the modern parkour is basic and boring to say the least. Rather than just being something you can do, largely an afterthought, it needs to once again be a primary mechanic. The whole game should be designed around movement. No other developer understands this concept as well as Techland and the Dying Light franchise. Parkour is at the very center of those games, and everything is built up from there. The level design, skill trees, the mission structure, enemies, everything either requires, includes, or is enhanced by the parkour experience. The combat and the parkour also cross over. You can use enemies to soften your landing or use them as launch pads, and Assassin's Creed used to employ similar techniques, allowing you to kill and keep moving or roll straight over an enemy. But again, that's a feature that was removed. Unlike the grapple hook in Syndicate, which virtually made parkour obsolete, the grapple hook in Dying Light enhances traversal, and that's true for every upgrade or tool that you unlock. The launch pads allow you to jump higher and further. The parachute allows you to cross wide streets or descend safely or launch upwards using an air vent. You can pole vault, wall run, slide under obstacles, use your knife to slide down a canvas. The list just goes on, but none of these mechanics make another one obsolete. They only give you more options as a player as you progress through the game, and nothing feels automatic. In Assassin's Creed, parkour for the most part is automated. You hold the high profile or sprint button and simply move against the surface to start climbing. You can keep hold of those buttons, and generally you will just move across any obstacle in the environment with relative ease. That's not to say there's no skill involved, especially in the earlier games. You still have to know the best time and direction to eject or perform a vertical leap, and a lot of the challenge was usually centered on specific traversal set pieces such as tombs. But in Dying Light, you have to find the best path and interact with the mechanics almost constantly. The game doesn't do half the work for you. You have to slide yourself, you have to know when to jump, you have to know when to stop before a ledge. It's less on rails, and by being less magnetized to the environment, you feel more realistically connected to it. If you want to jump to a beam in Assassin's Creed, you just push forwards. If you want to jump to a beam in Dying Light, you have to actually jump to it, and there's a risk of falling, which increases the tension and thrill. Usually when you fall in Assassin's Creed, it's because the targeting has misread your intentions, which can be frustrating, so occasionally the game will mess up. But in Dying Light, it's usually you that's messed up. You have more agency and more control, and when you understand the mechanics, it's a joy to play. Moving through the world is a giant puzzle to solve, rather than just something that you have to do by keeping hold of one button. I think the first step to improving parkour for the next generation of Assassin's Creed is for Ubisoft to give the player more trust. Take away the magnetism, let us take more risks, let us jump anywhere freely. We don't need to be stuck to the ground and only able to jump when the game thinks we should jump. The ability to jump freely allows you to make smarter decisions. You could jump early intentionally to land on a lower structure, for example, rather than clearing a gap. Automation just isn't how parkour works. It's about the freedom of movement, and with freedom comes choice. The game shouldn't make these decisions for you. Assassin's Creed needs to remove the shackles that it has on the player. In Dying Light, the jump button is tied to R1, the top right shoulder button. It feels a little bit weird at first, but you'll soon realise that this gives you far more control because you can run, jump, and control the camera with your right thumb at the same time. You don't need to take your thumb away from the camera to jump. Assassin's Creed should employ that same system. To compensate for the attack button being repurposed, the right trigger could be the sole attack button, with a tap being a light attack and a hold being a heavy attack. And that's assuming they don't go back to the older style of combat in the first place, where the attack button was tied to square. A completely free jump would also allow for things like jump attacks, things like drop kicks, or maybe even a jumping wall attack. And it also means that X or A on Xbox remains a dedicated dodge and roll button. A way that they could incorporate a level of skill with a free jump is contextual animations based on distancing. Vector does this very well. I know it's a mobile game, but let's imagine for a second that Assassin's Creed has a system where if you're running towards a low wall, you can press the jump button to perform a vault. If you press it too soon, you'll perform a slower type of vault. If you press it too late, you'll stumble and trip and be slowed down. Vault at the perfect time, and you'll perform the most efficient type of maneuver for that particular type of obstacle. Apply this throughout the whole game for various types of obstacles, and you'd have a rhythmic type of gameplay that rewards timing. I'd also like to see tools implemented back into parkour as well. They balanced it quite well with the hook blade because it enhanced traversal, but Syndicate went way too far. I'd love to see a rope swing brought back, something like a grappling hook from Ghost of Tsushima, which can't be used everywhere, but it can aid movement in certain situations. They actually had something like this in Assassin's Creed Liberation with Avelin's Whip, and for some reason they never used that again, despite it being a perfect traversal tool. More contextual interactions would help you feel immersed. The pole vault from Mirage is a good start, but I think they should bring back Black Flag's rope swings, more zip lines, launch pads from Assassin's Creed 2, the forward swing from Revelations. You see, as I mentioned, Assassin's Creed has all these cool ideas, but they're spread across different games and never brought forwards into new entries. Having all these different movement options in one game doesn't make it feel overstuffed. It simply gives the player more to do. Just like I said in my Spider-Man 2 traversal video, the more mechanics available to the player, the more engaged they will feel in a traversal system. And it's not just about preset contextual mechanics. There are indie games in development that will eclipse Assassin's Creed as the king of parkour because they're fully focused on movement. Storror Parkour Pro, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, by Hole in the Sleeve, looks phenomenal. In one of their trailers they mentioned that they want to do for parkour what the Tony Hawk games did for skateboarding, and you can definitely see the influence. You have almost no restrictions in how you can move across the detailed and varied environments. The developers themselves are deeply involved with the sport, and they're using some of the best motion capture tech available to make the movement feel authentic. It's mind-boggling how realistic this game looks. The character model isn't glued to the floor. You can fail, you can fall, but the prospect of failure means that success is all the more rewarding. Now, unlike Parkour Pro or Tony Hawk, Assassin's Creed has multiple plates to spin. It's not purely focused on parkour, it also has to factor in stealth, combat, story, and much more. When you have multiple layers to a game, each aspect is inevitably going to be shallower than it would be if it were the sole focus. So that's understandable to an extent. But it's not an excuse for parkour to be almost forgotten. In the early days of the series, it was described as one of the 3 main pillars of gameplay, alongside combat and stealth. Unity should be the starting point. It's not perfect, but it can be perfected. Incorporate the ascend and descend design philosophy, the omnidirectional movement where you can scale walls diagonally, the powerful side and back ejects and crazy dives. Incorporate all the environmental and contextual interactions from past games as much as possible. Most importantly, recruit tracers who actually partake in the sport and use mocap to capture realistic and varied vault animations. We know that Ubisoft is capable of these animations because they did it in Watch Dogs 2. Combine that with the fluidity of Unity and then allow us the freedom to jump, flip, dive and tic-tac. If we can freely jump, allow us to rebound off a wall by pressing jump again. Let us balance on beams, change direction easily on poles, add different types of vaults and skill based on distancing and timing. Combine the combat mechanics with the parkour. Let's say we kick an enemy which has a stun effect. Allow us to use the jump button to launch off the enemy for a quick escape. The more interconnected the parkour is with the combat and stealth experience, the more essential it feels and the more immersed and invested we are as players. Nobody should be playing Assassin's Creed and thinking of parkour as a chore. You should want to use parkour in and of itself. After finishing the game, you should want to dive back in just to run and jump around for fun, because that's what parkour and freerunning is. Sometimes I'll jump on Dying Light just to see if I can pull off a spectacular parkour run. I'd never do that in Assassin's Creed Valhalla, and that's sad for a series that arguably started it all. So, in summary, Ubisoft needs to make parkour a top priority in the gameplay experience, learn and carry over the successes of previous games instead of constantly going backwards and forwards, invest in new motion capture to reinvigorate how parkour looks so that it accurately represents the art, and loosen up the traversal system so that it has more freedom and less hand-holding. Hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for checking it out once again. Don't forget to drop a like or dislike depending on how you feel about it. Again, subscribe if you're new here so you don't miss future videos. Have a great day wherever you are, and I'll see you in the next one.